yeah, just make sure that your voice is generally well projected, and
Okay.
we should be good.
All right.
Okay. Tom?
All right, welcome to episode 5 of the Peterpodcast. I'm your host, reporter Taylor Clydesdale. This week on the podcast, my co-host is Lois Tuffin.
Hello.
And Ann, why don't you introduce yourself as our guest?
Hi, I'm Ann Jaeger, and I'm an artist in town and generally vocal supporter of the arts community here.
Yeah, so this week we're talking about arts in and around Peterborough and the downtown and arts spaces. And you've been pretty vocal on Twitter and social media about art spaces. So why don't you tell me kind of about what's the downtown situation with art spaces right now?
Well, I think this year has been kind of a critical one because a lot of the artist spaces, or spaces that artists have been renting, low-income spaces, there's been a lot of turnover of some of the major downtown properties and more to come. We've also lost 3 major venues for performance, the Spill, Catalina's, and what's the other one?
Pig's Ear?
Pig's Ears. So the artists are always precarious in terms of space, and what artists need. 2 important things that artists always need is time and space. So most people don't realize that you need spaces that are affordable, and I'm talking about not commercial affordable, but I'm talking about like $1 a square foot, which is...
Well, that's what I'm thinking, that I've been doing some of those gallery tours, crawls, which are
Right.
great the first Friday of the month.
Right.
And there's that building beside St. Veronis that you go in, and there's this whole labyrinth of little studios, and I thought it was really exciting to see those spaces where these little rooms just full of bits and pieces, and people were able to share their work in a space that ordinarily hadn't existed a couple of years ago, as far as I was aware.
Well, actually, it did exist.
Well, it was
has been
hidden, but it's
existing.
nice that
It's been hidden.
people were flooding in there.
There were, I think for January, it was minus 30 below, and we had like 500 people wandering all over that building, looking at art of different kinds. And it's also, there's a spin-off benefit for the business community as well, which is kind of interesting because this is an initiative entirely of the arts community.
Are arts spaces big contributors to the downtown economy? Do they drive a lot of business downtown?
It's not as direct as that.
I would say I've seen lots of evidence.
Yeah.
I was out last Thursday. There was a sold-out Ron James show at one of the venues, and the restaurant was packed, and the restaurant was blown away by the amount of traffic. My friends and I always do dinner out with
Right.
drinks before we go to a
Exactly.
show. So as a patron, I spend a lot of money downtown before I go.
Right.
Look at art.
I think that's generally the case. So, you know, the art event may not be the generator of money, but the spin-off of that and the general well-being of the downtown. I mean, the Arts Call has created much of a sense of safety downtown, and I think people, that was one problem that the BBIA has always complained about, that it doesn't feel safe. People come down from the burbs, it's multi-generational. We get everybody down there, and everybody's just kind of wandering around going, wow, this is really cool. So those spaces have actually been artist studios for, like, Joe Stable's been in his space for 40 years.
40, okay.
In that building. But that building has recently been bought by Ashburn Realty. So there's no real contract with the arts community that says that we're going to be able to stay there, that the rents won't go up. We hope that that will be the case. So far nobody's been, turfed out. So
Do you want a commitment from developers or the city to kind of protect and establish art spaces in the downtown? Like, who needs to do what for those spaces to exist downtown?
Well, I think it has to be, I think the city should be working with the artists, the developers in concert. For example, if we take that building as a good example, there are lots of grants to renovate that space. There's also, I think the mayor, you mentioned the mayor has introduced, has asked for a report on a lower tax bracket for artist hubs. So those are things that are incentivize a developer to keep artists in place. But if you don't involve the artists in that decision making, then you end up with a weird thing. That's usually, maybe you'll get designers, businesses and arts-related businesses, but the artists themselves will be gone. And there are lots of places, it's a global phenomenon that artists move into a neighborhood, a run-down neighborhood, and then they fix up the place. They create a nice vibe in the community, and then the developers follow them around and literally buy up these properties for cheap and then raise the rents, and the artists have to leave. And along with that, you end up with, other low-income brackets are also sort of being turfed out. So the artists have an equalizing effect on neighborhoods. They work really well with other sectors of the community, whether it's people with mental health issues or new immigrants. So there's a lot of intangible benefits to having arts in a community. But definitely they raise the profile of buildings. So I think that the city could do things like, create that special tax bracket. I think the developers could work with the arts community itself to come up with ideas about how those buildings could be renovated and where the funding could come, so the developers aren't absorbing all of that cost. We can't expect them to provide it. And then the city could come up with some maybe ways to create special funds to subsidize those spaces as well. I've seen that in places like New York City where they've done that.
How would you think the artists would be involved in that discussion then? What's the best way to get those voices to the table?
Sit down and talk to us.
Okay, but there's a huge community. You're like 300 artists. I'm just saying 300
Right.
isn't even the full community.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think
intrigued.
in the it depends on the space, obviously, but the Commerce Building, for example, is I think there's about 20 artists in that building that could certainly be consulted in various ways.
Yeah, there's such a diversity of artists.
And I would really like, I'm honestly curious why the city doesn't use us to consult for other urban, conceptualizing urban spaces. That's what we do. We're really good at coming up with new ideas about how to repurpose space.
So do you think part of the consultation process for, designing these urban spaces is to get local artists involved in that?
I absolutely think that would be really great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, maintaining affordability for artists is something that's kind of been popping up as a common conversation, especially because in the fall, I believe, there was the Precarious Arts Festival, which highlighted the fact that artists they're precarious workers. They're not making as much as people in other fields, and they often have a hard time, being able to afford necessities like rent. That's the conversations that were being had. So what's your experience with that? Is that what you see? Do you see starving artists in Peterborough?
Yeah, artists make 32% less than other occupations. I think the average income of an artist in Canada is $22,000 a year, and that includes their day job.
Yeah, I was going to say, and that's the continuous work in the arts field is often an issue, right? It's more contract work.
Well, an artist, a person who's actually involved with their actual practice, needs a job that can be somewhat flexible usually. So, that ends up being in the service industry or maybe a nonprofit or teaching. And those are usually, contract or short-term or low-paying jobs. Then you may also apply for grants, but you have to continually apply for those grants and you never know if you're going to get one. So it's really hard to make any future plans. If you're in a job, you may have to take some time off to do your project or take your music out on tour or something like that. So you have to have a job that's flexible enough that you can take time off. So the arts are definitely hurting. And in Peterborough, particularly, we spend, Peterborough spends, this is according to the Community Foundation's Vital Signs, we spend about $65 per capita annually on the arts, and a place like Guelph spends $107, I think.
So those are tax dollars or public dollars? Taxpayer dollar, like
Taxpayer.
personal. When I spend $65, or is the city paying $65?
The city, I believe.
Okay,
I think,
interesting.
yeah.
Okay. Actually, more than $65. I have an art collection in my office.
Well, that's, yeah, that's another part of it, is the public, is the sponsorship that it has to come into play as well to help
Yeah.
support the arts.
Okay.
I really like to think of the arts not as a product, it's more of a resource, it's more of the word culture is really great because it's something that it's like a sourdough culture, something you need to feed it periodically to keep it alive, but you can't mess with it too much or it'll die. You
Well,
have to kind of let it do its own thing.
Well, it paints the downtown in that you go to the downtown and you listen to music at the music venues. You do the art crawls. It's one of the reasons that people come to Peterborough, and it's one of the things that livens up the downtown. So I get what you mean.
Yeah, it has many, many intangible benefits, like, I mean,
But it's social too. I mean, I go with a group of friends to the art crawls, and yeah, so it gets a group of us downtown that ordinarily wouldn't get together. It gives us an excuse.
right.
Yeah.
How's that? A good
It's
excuse.
a good excuse.
Mhm.
Yeah,
To see beautiful
for sure.
things and share beautiful things.
Yeah.
Yeah, or like I'll have a friend who doesn't come to Peterborough very often, but then when we do, we usually go through the art gallery. And that's usually a fun trip, but then the art gallery is kind of its own problem because of how small and out of the way it is.
Yeah, it's kind of separate from the rest of the arts community. I mean, there's this little core of artists in the downtown core that are doing so much work. It's all original. It's unlike any other art scene I've ever seen. There's a lot of cross-disciplinary things that are happening, and I think we should, continue to support that a lot.
Sometimes what the city would be like without Kate Story coordinating all the things that
Exactly.
she does. She's one of those people
She
that pulls
really-
people together and highlights the precariousness of the
Yeah.
of the field. So,
But someone like that who creates opportunities for other artists, that's an important thing, and they need to be supported as well.
Yeah.
Public Energy has some incubator programming that's incredible for the arts community, and Arts Week is another one that's good. Let's see what other things I've forgotten to say.
This is why you bring notes.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
the-
like, there's an artist that I know named Gary Blundell who lives up in Halliburton. He says, why don't they fund the things that are already working?
yes.
I think, sometimes the organizations want to, okay, well, we'll do this for you. Well, no, just, we're already doing something that's attracting people. Why wouldn't you want to let us continue to work in that direction?
So help you out.
Yeah, help us to continue to do the work we do.
That's cool.
Yeah. I think that's about it for time right now. But definitely there's, as we always say, there's so much more to the conversation than, what we just talked about. So definitely go downtown.
Come down to the art crawl on Friday night.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much for coming here, Ann.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, it's been great. Can't
Nice
wait
to
hear more
talk to
about
you.
your work. Yeah.
And we'll see you next week on the Peter Podcast.
Okay. Great.